Well, welcome back to the channel, everybody. Well, this is part 3 of Joe's Pinhole Cameras, what's now a series hosted by myself and co-host Ethan Moses, my fellow camera making and photographer friend. He came over here a few weeks ago and we sat down and covered just about every camera that I've made. So in this continuing series, we're just going to follow through kind of a chronological order with all the cameras I've made. This episode, we're going to cover the 9-chambered grid camera. Grid cameras were an idea I came up with about a decade ago for having one sheet of photo paper with 9 different images from 9 different pinhole chambers. And it makes a composite collage picture, and you compose the image with the idea of a collage in mind. We're going to look at this camera, how it's made, and some example images. And the next camera we'll cover is this little brass 120 roll film square format pinhole camera. And then finally, one of the more unusual cameras in my collection. This is like a pinhole camera, but it's a pin-speck camera. A pin-speck camera, instead of using a micro aperture to form an image, it uses a front surfaced mirror that's the same size as a pinhole, and it reflects a coherent image off that tiny little mirror. We'll look at that and some example images also, so stay tuned. Okay, well, so in the evolution of ideas to how to get multiple pictures out in the field, I came across the idea eventually of having cellular camera with multiple images on one sheet of paper. And this started from going through thrift stores and seeing those wooden frames of printers' dies, you know, the little square boxes. And I started thinking, if you could get one of those and pull the frame out and put a piece of photo paper behind it, then you could have separate pinhole chambers in one. So my sketch journals got filled up with ways of making these cellular cameras.
It makes perfect sense that you would, of all people, make cameras based on typesetter boxes.
Oh, yeah, of course, right? So this one has a platform with a tripod nut and some brackets, but it's basically a plywood box made of model aircraft plywood. And
Did you build the box?
Yep. And so it opens up like that. The back of the camera is just flocked with felt, jewelry box clasps. This particular design is for 8x10 sheet of paper. You lay a sheet of paper in here and you have 9 chambers, each one with its own pinhole, and I'm using copper pipe caps.
It really reminds me of an advent calendar.
Yes.
I could see making a product for next Christmas based on this.
Yes. Yeah.
How many sections in an advent calendar?
I don't know, 30 maybe? Or
I don't know. Maybe
12?
Maybe we should make a
Hanukkah
calendar.
Hanukkah calendar, yes, with 8
holes.
So the idea, I had a lot of different ideas. There's an infinite number of ways to do this if you want one sheet of photo paper with multiple images. This particular layout was, you have a central image area with the main scene. You have 4 panorama kind of oriented things that you could, like, ostensibly, if you're documenting, let's just hypothetically say an old farmhouse. You have the main setting of the farm and the windmill. Then you have 4 cardinal directions, the 4 different views. And then you have these 4 little side images of small, like little details, like the tractor seat and the windmill and the doorknob on the farmhouse, something like that.
I love it.
That was the whole idea. You could do a photo essay in one sheet of paper, right? The challenge with this particular camera was I'm using 9 different pinholes, and unless you're using laser made pinholes or something the exposures do vary. I wasn't up to the top of my game in pinhole making in the time I made this, so some of them are different sizes. Also, you got to know your orientation, because the images get flipped left to right and up to down in the camera, so you have to figure out which image is going to be on the bottom right part of the camera, but it's flipped the other way inside.
Which is why it says top on the bottom and bottom on the top.
Yes, and left on the right on the left. So
that's great. And so these are just regular pipes and pipe caps.
Yeah, and I use JB Weld epoxy.
I see. But you've got like a little cone.
So what I did is I used a countersinking drill bit in the wood to make a cone that barely breaks through the tip of the hole of that into the back. And the pinhole is taped to the back of the front plate.
So the pipes don't actually go through?
No, the pipes are actually JB welded. That's actually what the epoxy is to hold these little sections of copper pipe. And if you've done it right, they won't fall off too badly.
Great.
But you should probably squeeze them a little bit to get them out of round enough just so they stay on. So some of them might fall off if you're not careful.
I do the same thing with the battery terminals on my van when I pull them off.
But I have pages and pages of sketch journals of different orientations of how to do this grid camera is what I called it. You could do 11 by 14 and you could have just a grid of equal sized images. You could have a massive square image with like film sprocket sized little square images on the left and right, which would be really cool, right? If you imagine doing a portrait of somebody and then having little tiny alternate views of them along the left and right. There's a lot of ways to do this. The other idea, which came along much later and we'll look at later, is use one pinhole and have a pull shutter on each chamber and have the pinhole go in front of the pull shutter so you can use the same and get the same exposure.
Like the pinholio.
Like the pinholio, yes. Which is available from Cameradactyl Cameras. For how much?
Well, I don't know.
Oh, I don't know.
Check the website.
Yeah, check the website.
Joe, have you thought about how you might put in multiple viewfinders or move a viewfinder around?
Yeah, that was difficult.
Tough.
It's tough. You can't really easily do that. You have to guess, a lot more guesswork. I actually did think of something. I didn't build it, but conceptually is you have this mounting plate, right? Let's say you built an identical box that has viewing pyramids. It's open in the front, has a little peephole in the back of each chamber, and you would set that down, get it aligned, and then replace it with the camera in the holder on the tripod. I mean, that would be really the only practical way to do it. But another source of, you could buy the accessory viewing box.
So, okay, this seems like one of your most well-made cameras, right? The wood is finished beautifully.
Thanks.
It goes together. Like the tolerances are great. I love the caps on the front. Like it seems like you put a lot of work into actually finishing this product.
Yep.
I would guess then you shot a lot with it.
Somewhat, not as much as you think.
What's your favorite picture that you shot with it?
I have a picture on the north side of the Sandia Mountains by Placitas.
Sure.
That I just shot up there at one of the little picnic grounds up there. Well, thus far from looking at my camera collection, you would think I've never made a roll film camera. I've only used, paper negatives and sheet film and stuff. But this was one of the few roll film cameras I made. It's made of brass. It's for 120. And again, the thing with brass is you can solder it together. It's a soft metal. It's easy to work on. This one has a lid that pulls out. There is a little slide-up piece that has a red filter, so you can view your frame numbers through the back of the camera. A little bit of craft foam in the back for light proofing. And it's a simple square format pinhole camera, 2 spools, some brass tubes that the film slides over to go from one side to the other.
Do they rotate or they're just smooth?
They're fixed. They're just smooth. And the inside of the camera is just spray painted flat black. I have some brass knobs that turn, and there are some threaded brass machine screws on the bottom that you loosen up to take off this film spool out of there.
What did you make those knobs on the top out of?
So they are brass machine screws. Well, you can kind of see there is a brass screw head, a brass screw that comes up from the inside. It has a washer soldered to it that fits in the slot of the film spool.
That's a really good detail.
And then a couple brass nuts with lock washers and a thumb screw so they stay together, and it makes a light trap with a piece of foam in there. So you just loosen this screw on the bottom. The screw on the bottom goes up through the hole in the film spool, keeps it in place, and if you remove that screw, you can flick the film out.
Yeah?
Yeah.
These really remind me of some of the cameras that Lucas Landers makes, just in the way they look, and that it's really nice hand metal work.
Well, brass is so fun to work with. You can solder it, as I say. You can file it real easy. You can cut it easy. This one you have to sort of just flip it like that and bend a little bit to get it out. Yeah.
And so you cut these washers in
Yeah,
half.
I cut them in half and soldered them on the slot of the screw head.
That's wild.
And they just fit into that little slot in the end of the film spool. And then my tripod bushing is one of these T-nuts, not the kind with the prongs, but the kind just with the 3 holes. And I soldered it to the bottom of the inside and then spray painted it. I put a little piece of brass I soldered on the end of it so that the light won't come through, and then, so.
Yeah, this is a beautiful camera.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And these screws thread through a brass nut that also is soldered on the inside.
There's very little glue for a Joe Van Cleef.
Very
camera.
little glue and very little gaffer's tape. I don't think there's any gaffer's tape. In fact, that's a new record, right?
Yeah, I mean, if this were a product, it would be a very expensive camera.
Yeah, a lot of handwork.
It reminds me of jewelry, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's not usually what I go for in what I'm building, but
Right.
I mean, man, that's cool. And it looks like you bent some of these corners and then just cut and soldered.
Yeah, I think the front and the sides were just bent from one piece, and the top and bottom soldered on.
Hey, you should show the shutter is great.
Yeah, so I have a pivoting piece of metal that pivots on a rivet, but it's a little tight. And then I soldered a brass nut to the side of this with a spring that's supposed to retract the shutter, but that nut is for threading on a shutter release cable. And the little center pin of the shutter release cable pushes this out and opens up the shutter like that. So that's a cool little...
That's clever.
The challenge was, how do you open and close a tiny camera without shaking the camera? And having a cable makes it a lot easier. Yeah.
And is that a standard cable release thread?
I think it was pretty close. And being a brass nut,
you just cross-thread it.
You just cross-thread it until it fits. That's another Joe Van Cleef innovation.
Great.
Yeah.
And did you have a sighting system on this camera?
No, there's no sighting system, unfortunately. But you could easily build one, with just some dots, right? So,
what's the focal length of it?
That is a good question. It's
like
probably about
55,
yeah,
60?
Yeah, about that. It's pretty close to a 60-degree angle of view there. So not super wide, not super long, but
I like that.
Yeah.
That sort of pinhole camera that's just a little bit lighter than normal.
And so it's a cool camera, and unfortunately I haven't used it as much as I should have, because we were talking about this earlier. But
Joe doesn't like roll film.
Well, it's not just that, but it's really about, I found myself more interested in building cameras than using them at some certain point. Yeah, I don't know. But that's a whole other topic. That's probably, you need a psychologist to figure that one out.
Yeah, they could work on both of us.
Yeah, we need help. So then I started reading about, you can have a micro aperture and it'll make an image because it selectively chooses one image phase. But you could also do the same thing with a front surface mirror, the same size as a pinhole. It'll reflect a coherent image. The challenge is, how do you keep that image from being fogged? And so this camera was my initial attempt to do that. This was a 90 millimeter focal length, I think it was initially. And the way it worked is you have a little clothespin spring back for putting in a film holder, a 4x5 film holder in the slot here. And then this is the front of the camera, but the view comes from the side. And it is a tiny piece. It's like I had a big front surface mirror, and I would basically take a glass cutter and break off a piece that's about a 1/2 inch or 3/8 inch square roughly. And then I would take India ink and paint over the entire area except for a tiny circular area in the middle, and that's my front surface mirror. And then I mounted that in the base of this little pyramid. It's no longer in here, by the way, but the idea was that you have to have the light rays coming into that mirror and then reflect at a 90-degree angle to the film plane without light fogging the film directly. And that was the challenge. So you can't have an ultra-wide angle of view camera with a pin-speck camera. It has to be more telephoto or more normal, right? So you think of two like pyramids, one in here and here. That's kind of the way it is. You have a viewing image projected onto the film plane back here. from a collecting image coming in here at a 90-degree angle.
It's the world's worst spy camera.
World's worst.
You've got to make somebody stand still.
That's
for
right.
20 minutes.
Yes, I'm going to spy on you and take a picture from the side, but I need you to stand still for 20 minutes.
Does this top come off?
Yeah, actually.
I spent about 20 minutes looking at this thing before I realized.
And then I realized,
it worked.
yeah, it actually, so.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so, yeah.
That is a great baffle.
I have this wall here, so the light comes in this way, and right here in this little area is, you can't see it, I'll show you, is where the mirror was or is. I think it used to be. I took it out or something. Anyways, I had to have this other wall to keep this direct light from coming in and bouncing off this wall and fogging. And so you have to have a lot of flocking to absorb
I noticed you
light.
have super heavy flocking.
Yeah,
in there, really
yeah.
thick.
This also was pioneering the idea of using clothespins as a spring back.
Really clever. And Joe, what's that pyramid thing?
So I realized that this is the second version that I made. The first version of this pin-speck camera was a cardboard pyramid situated on its side, a bigger one, that had literally just a cardboard base that you put a piece of photo paper in and closed it in. This was probably a support pyramid that had just a support. It was like two pyramids connected by their apex on their sides, and you needed a support pyramid. This was just part of the history of it, but that was the first one. It was like cardboard, a multiple thing sitting on a plate of wood, and it was so delicate that it ended up getting broke and all that, and parts of those parts were used in this camera. But it was this whole conceptual thing of how do you make a pin-speck camera with a front surface mirror, right? And
I mean, I've never even heard of this type of camera.
I have a couple images. I never really got great. Like I couldn't get a full 4x5. It was like vignetted and stuff, but I got a coherent image.
Huh. And have you seen other people build these? Or this was
No, I've never.
Just you?
I think I read about it on some book about pinhole photography, but this was, pin-speck camera, micro mirror, reflecting an image. Yeah.
Wild.
Yeah. So it's not as practical, obviously, even if you could get the design to make a full-size image. It can't be wide angle. And what's your transmission loss on the reflectivity of the mirror? How smooth is that? Is there a scratch right across it that'll affect the image? It's not like a hole.
I think this is probably the least practical camera that I've seen you make.
But it explores like intellectual exploration of how far you can take camera making and to what extremes can you make an image, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is the first camera that totally perplexed me, and is a style of camera I have never ever even heard of. It's amazing. I bought and sold cameras for a decade. I've never seen anything like this.
Well, it should be, decorated in something. You should get a hot glue gun and just go to a toy store and start decorating with plastic toys or something, right? Just to make it look like something.
We can make that happen.
We could get some gravel. We got plenty of rocks in New Mexico. We could cover it in rocks. Well, that was a fun conversation we had. I think of all three of these cameras, the roll film brass camera, in spite of its construction and all that, it's probably the least interesting to me. It's been done time and time again. These other two cameras, however, are really interesting. The grid camera concept, there's so much that can be done with this. Having one large sheet of paper film, multiple compartments in different arrangements of grids. It's just an interesting idea. There's even the idea of having inner camera chambers that you can kind of move around like Legos or like a tile puzzle, and you could fit different cameras together, reconfigure the grid, if you will. And so there's all kinds of possibilities there. This is certainly one of the most unique cameras, and as I remember now, the history of this one, the pin-speck camera, is more recently, after I built this one, I took the mirror out of it and I tried to build a better version that gave me a little bit more wider angle, less vignetting on the edge, and I never was able to successfully make anything better than what this did. So this is a real challenge, the design of this camera. Light coming in from the side, there is a tiny little partially enclosed chamber in the bottom, and the mirror is going to reflect the image 90 degrees back toward the film plane here, but you have to have the light baffles to keep direct rays of light coming through from fogging the paper itself, and that's the challenge. And so, yeah, it's an interesting camera, very experimental, but hey, it makes an image, and that's what's important. Well, look forward to the next video in this series. This has been fun, reviewing all my cameras and just going through all the images. I had forgotten some of these pictures, actually, and it's fun to go through these. I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Drop a note down below. And until next time, stay creative as always, and have yourselves a great day. Bye-bye for now.